I don't know what I'm going to do. They won't stop pounding on the door. They won't stop calling my name. And before long, someone with keys is going to come along and unlock my office. I don't know what to do. Completely out of my element here. And all my brain can come back to is that coffee. The coffee. The goddamn coffee. "First cup of the morning?" he'd asked, and all I could do was smile at him. He must be new. Because if he'd been here longer than a week, he'd know how often I show up to this machine. I stood before the coffee pot like a worshiper at the altar, and as the savory black liquid spilled into the pot, I felt my mouth water at the thought of coffee. First cup. Yeah, right. I started my day with the taste of warm, fresh brewed coffee. As I'd cooked my breakfast, I'd had another, savoring this one a little, as I never did the first cup. And as I sat down to catch up on my emails, I drank a third as I ate my breakfast. I'd had another one on the way to work, savoring the aroma as I sat in traffic, and now it was time to get a cup before I sat down for another day of work. First cup. Try fifth. I've been like this since my late teens. My mother was a career nurse who drank coffee by the pot, not the cup. As a single mother trying to keep up with an active son, there was never a time I can't remember when coffee wasn't part of our lives. When I was just a tyke, my mom was always running late due to my inability to get moving in the morning. No one wants to lose their job because their kid can't get ready on time, so one morning, she gave me a sippy cup of coffee, sweetened with milk and sugar. No surprise, I took to it like a fish to water. The other parents looked at her funny when she told them. She heard the usual sermons about how coffee would stunt my growth and make me hyper, but she always felt she knew better. The fact that I was never prone to hyperactivity and grew to top out about 6 feet seemed to have proven their worries were groundless. Coffee is life for me. It runs through my veins, and I always joke that when I die, I'm going to donate my body to Starbucks. I can be their flavor of the month. That cup looks a little rough, don't you think? I turned to see Chuck wander into the break room then, unrecognizable health smoothie in his "My Body is a Temple" shaker cup. The new guy greeted him as he came in, and I extended my hand for a fist bump. As he met my knuckles with his, I couldn't help but shudder a little at how scaly and clammy his skin always is. You'd think with all that rabbit food he ate that those healthy shakes would make his skin a little softer, or at least clear up his skin condition. "It's got character, Chuck, unlike whatever you're drinking there." Chuck laughed. "If character is what you call mushrooms growing in the bottom of that thing." He was right. Not about the mushrooms, but about the state of my cup. I'd had this cup for 3 years, and in that time I had never once bothered to wash it. The outside was a little stained up, but otherwise looked pretty normal. The inside, however, was a dark cauldron of old coffee stains and filth. It didn't look that bad to me, but of course I had gotten used to it by now. I always justified it by telling myself that I was putting boiling water into it, so anything living in there was likely to get boiled out of existence by the time I got around to drinking the coffee. I had no idea what I was setting myself up for. The hot liquid splashed into the cup with a luxuriant sound. I swirled the contents around in the cup before taking a test sip and gasping in pain. It was much too hot, but I had known that already. I talked with Chuck a few more minutes, and when Mr. Ryan strode into the break room, we all said our goodbyes and left for our desk. Mr. Ryan's was a fantastic boss, but he had a very narrow opinion on dawdling and socializing on company time. I said hi to a few other people in my hall and stopped at Rob's door to pass a few words. He was hard at it already, and I could see his tongue sticking out through his teeth, a nervous habit he said he'd had since elementary school. His dark hair looked sweaty, and when I asked him if he was okay, he said he had to make an 8 o'clock deadline, but maybe he could catch up at lunch. I said that sounded great, and as I walked to my office, I saw that Lisa was already behind her computer as well. Lisa was a mousy new girl that had moved into the office across from mine a few months ago. She was about my age, with straight brown hair that she always piled neatly on her head, and she had a cute pair of black glasses that were constantly needing to be pushed up the bridge of her nose. She didn't say much, but we waved at each other most mornings, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have just a little bit of a crush on her. She waved back, smiling in her shy way, and went back to work as I stepped into my office and closed the door. I sat the coffee on my desk and turned on my computer as I prepared to start another day. I'm an IT specialist, so my job is mostly fixing other people's problems. There was an email already from Janice about how her monitor wouldn't come on, and another from Steven about how his issues with the network had gotten out of hand again. I sipped my coffee as I read these, testing the hot liquid with my lips before committing to the sip. I reached for the phone so I could call Janice. Janice was a frequent caller. The IT guy before me had thought it was funny to give her the most ancient of our relic computers. I'd been keeping that dinosaur running for years now, and every time the budget committee told me they didn't have enough money for a new computer, I died a little inside. I called Steven, and after a few questions, it became apparent that his problem was of his own making again. He'd opened another questionable email, and now his computer wouldn't link to the network. That was by design. Steven was notorious for opening anything that found its way into his inbox. He'd brought the network down several times with this sort of behavior, and I logged in remotely to revert it to a previous state, which solved the problem. The virus hadn't been that aggressive, it seemed, and he thanked me for helping him. I reached for my cup and found that it was empty. I'd been sipping the coffee while I was on the phone with Steven, and I'd drank more than expected, I guess. I called Janice and asked her what was going on with her computer, and after a few sentences, I reached into the drawer and found a new power cord. The computers seemed to burn through them for some reason, and I'd recently made a note to keep them in stock. I locked my computer, grabbed my coffee cup, and figured I'd stop for a fresh cup on the way to Janice's office. I stepped out into the hallway, turned left, and stopped dead in my tracks. My cup shattered on the carpeted floor, and that drew the creature's attention at the end of the hallway. It was hideous. It had a bulbous gray head that was covered in coarse black hair, and the small white eyes that dotted its head were awful looking. Its jaw lolled open to reveal a mouthful of sewing needle teeth and a flicking red tongue that constantly moved over them. It was dressed in a white button-up shirt and a pair of black slacks, but the shirt bulged with coarse black hair, and the pants looked to be barely containing its oddly shaped legs. It looked at me, and for a second, eyes blinked in an odd succession before it raised a hand to ask if I was okay. I shuddered and felt my knees unhinge as I slid to the wall. It sounded like Rob. Rob's voice was coming out of this creature's mouth, and as it did, I could feel my mind slipping a little. What the hell was going on? Had I been drugged? Were they playing a trick on me? As the Rob creature made its way up the hall, I saw another thing stick its head out of the break room. It looked like an enormous bat head stuck in a business suit, and in one clawed, scaly hand, it held something that looked like Chuck's smoothie shaker. He didn't even look real. The creature looked like a photorealistic movie monster, or images from a horror site when someone has drawn creatures that just look a little too real. As the Rob creature got closer, I could see small sores on its skin, long curly hairs sprouting in places between its eyes, and I felt a scream ripping its way up my throat. The Chuck creature blinked his two big eyes at me. "What's wrong? You okay?" It came blundering out of the break room and towards me, and I felt my legs finally take orders as I backpedaled towards the exit door. It was 30 feet away, down several hallways, but I felt like I was motivated enough to run a mile in a minute flat. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong, and until I knew what was going on, I wasn't sure I could trust any of my senses. I had come to my office door when my back met resistance, and I realized I had bumped into someone. I turned my head woodenly to see what new horror I had blundered into, and I felt a fresh scream rip through me. It was a spider, a giant spider, but with a body on top of its abdomen like some fantasy creature from a video game. Its torso was vaguely feminine, breasts poking from beneath a blue cardigan that hung over its shoulders. Its 8 chitinous legs clicked on the floor as it took a step backwards to assess me. It looked at me with familiarity, and I could see that it had shiny black hair piled on its head above its 8 rotating eyes. 2 eyes seemed to be covered by thin metal glasses, and I blundered towards my door as I realized who it was. The spider thing was Lisa. Sorry, are you okay? I didn't mean to. I didn't let her finish. I pushed my way into my office and slammed the door behind me. I locked the handle, pushed my chair under it, and cringed against the farthest wall I could get to. What in the hell was going on? Had that been real? What was I seeing out there? That couldn't be my colleagues, could it? They had sounded like them, even sort of acted like them, but the creatures out there had been so nightmarish that I couldn't even process it. All I could do was huddle under my desk, knees pulled up to my chest, and try not to cry as someone knocked on the door. "You okay in there?" It was Chuck. "You scared Lisa half to death, man. I think she's crying in her office right now. Maybe you could come apologize?" I stiffened. Lisa was crying. Had I done that? I couldn't bear the thought that I had made Lisa cry. I had half risen from under my desk when I'd finally gotten hold of myself again. This wasn't real. The monsters were trying to trick me so they could get me out of my office. I sat back down under my desk and squeezed my knees against my chest again. They wouldn't trick me like that. I wasn't going to be fooled so easily. Chuck banged on the door, harder this time, and asked what my problem was. Rob's voice made an appearance as well, and he apologized for startling me. They were worried about me and wanted me to come out so they could sort through this. They were scared for me and wanted to see me. They got angry at how I was acting and started banging louder all the while. I just huddled under my desk and sobbed quietly. I couldn't process what was going on or why this was happening. And all the avenues seemed to come back to the coffee. Someone had drugged me. Someone was messing with me. Someone had done this to make me freak out. But why? That was when the phone rang. It jangled merrily in the cradle, unaware of the horror show that was just outside the door. I looked up over the edge of my desk like a cartoon mouse peeking out of his hole. I almost expected the phone to grow fangs or sprout eyes, but it didn't. It just continued to be an average black plastic phone. I reached out shakily for it, and as my sweaty hands settled around it, I felt it solidify and had second thoughts about my perception. My desk was still here. My computer still hummed peacefully. If this was a world for monsters, then how could all these things exist? How would a monster type with big clawed hands? How would he sit in a normal chair? How would he pick up the phone? As I picked up the phone, I heard Mr. Ryan's calm voice wash over me. It took me a minute to realize that he was calling my name as I was just sitting there in the calm warmth of my realization. "Hello, sir?" I said, and my voice shook a little. "Are you okay?" His voice was calm and rich and made me feel like control had been restored. I don't know, sir. I'm seeing some weird stuff. Have you imbibed any substances today? It's okay if you have. I just want to know how we can help you. I just had a cup of coffee in the break room and coffee at home. I was fine when I got here, sir, and now I don't know what's going on. I'll be there in a few minutes. Just wait. And he hung up before I could tell him about the monsters. I hung up the phone and sat huddled under my desk. He wouldn't be able to get here, not with the monsters out there, and even if he could, would he be normal? Maybe this was just another trick by the monsters. I sat under my desk, shuddering and waiting for the creatures to break down my door and get me. They had stopped banging and shouting, but I could still hear them scuttling around out there. They were waiting, just waiting for me to drop my guard. Then they'd have me. 4 loud knocks made me jump and hit my head on the desk. "It's Mr. Rhines. Open the door, please, so we can talk about this." I slunk from under my desk, looking for all the world like a scared rabbit as I approached the door like I thought it might explode. Are the monsters gone?" He didn't answer right away, probably hoping he had misheard me. "Monsters?" I put my mouth close to the door jamb and whispered, "The monsters are out in the hall." No monsters. Why don't you let me in so we can talk about all this and get everything straightened out? Your friends and co-workers are worried about you and are anxious to get this sorted out." My hand shook as I set it on the doorknob. I must have been wrong. Maybe I'd just had a psychotic incident or something. Now everything was back to normal. I had acted like an ass and scared the hell out of everyone. It was time to go face the music, maybe find out what all this was about, and as I wrapped my hand around the knob, I was sure that everything would be back to normal when I opened the door. As the door came open, the worst horror of all was waiting for me. He was a demon. His skin was the color of burnt pork and was awash with cracks and blisters that opened and oozed as he stood before me. His hands were cruel claws sprouting from the cuffs of his Armani suit, and his wings extended like a miasma behind him. His face was a wide, lolling mouth, eyeless and earless, with a massive set of ram's horns that curled above the door jamb as he hulked in it. When he opened his mouth, I heard the voice of Satan himself, the lilting voice that invited Eve to eat an apple, and I knew that I would never be able to deny him if he spoke. Now, let's see what all this is. I slammed the door in his face, and they've been banging at it for nearly 30 minutes. So here I sit, writing my experience in the hopes that someone will take something from this before they burst through the door and get me. As I write, though, a sobering feeling has occurred to me. There's a mirror in my desk. As I write this, I can't help but look at the drawer and fight the urge to pull it out. As I sit here panicked, afraid that I have somehow found myself in a world of monsters, I never stop to think that maybe the problem is me. Maybe I've lived inside a delusion my whole life. Something in that odd cup of coffee triggered me to see the world for what it really is. Could it be possible that if I were to take that mirror out and look at myself, I could see my own scales and fangs and slime as well? Could it be that somehow the veil has been pulled away and I'm finally seeing the world for what it really is? I guess the lesson here is this: maybe a little soap and water is cheaper than the loss of your own sanity. And maybe I should have listened when they told me to clean my damn cup. Dave knew something was off from the moment the knife sliced into the turkey, but he put it out of his mind as he served the meat to his guests. It was nerves, he told himself. This was their first year hosting the family Thanksgiving, his family and his in-laws both being in attendance, and as Dave tasted the expertly cooked bird, he set his fears to rest. It was delicious, one of the best turkeys he'd ever eaten, and he pushed the mashed potatoes onto the golden flesh as he shoveled it into his mouth. The table had been lengthened for their guests, and the whole clan sat around as they talked, laughed, and ate. Dave looked around at the gathering and was glad they had agreed to host this year. Normally, Thanksgiving was a hectic time for his family. They would start their day at 7:30, getting the girls ready so they could leave by 9 and arrive at his parents' house by 10. They would visit for a little while, having an early lunch at 11, leaving by 1 to arrive at her parents' house by 2. After some socializing, they would eat turkey dinner at 4, and she and her mother, sometimes with her younger sister in tow, would go out to hit the Black Friday deals while Dave and his brother-in-law Terry watched the kiddos. By the time they got back, Dave was exhausted and still stuffed from dinner, and God help him if his office didn't give him the next day off, because he'd be good for little after all that. But that was before they'd bought the house. The house was so big and beautiful that it had just made sense to host both families and be done with it. Dave's mother was already planning to join the Black Friday festivities with Sylvia and her family, and Dave was looking forward to putting on his pajamas and relaxing after the meal was finally put away. The kids could play in the backyard or rest in the living room. The adults could get comfortable or head out to shop, and Dave could rest a little instead of going non-stop all day. Yup, Dave thought as he poured more gravy on his turkey, this year was gonna be different. It wasn't until he started putting away the leftovers that he remembered that funny feeling he'd got when he sliced the bird earlier. The green bean casserole, mashed potatoes, rolls, corn, and even the pumpkin pie that remained had been easily stored in Tupperware containers, so they could either go to various houses with his family members, or be returned to the fridge to make sandwiches and plates for the next few days. Dave was in his comfy pants, the sweats he liked to wear while he watched football or did house chores, And as his belly pushed at the waistband, he was once again happy that he didn't have to ride out the rest of the evening on his in-law's couch while his belly pushed at his jeans like a bloated whale. The electric knife buzzed as he cut the turkey, putting the pieces into an extra-large Tupperware. There was more than he'd expected, especially considering how much his guests had put away. Terry was currently snoring on the couch, his overshirt unbuttoned to reveal the rise and fall of his swollen stomach. Terry had eaten 4 helpings of the turkey all by himself, and between the lot of them, they should have eaten several turkeys. When the Tupperware was full, the lid barely closing on the almost 3-gallon container, Dave furrowed his brow at the still mostly whole turkey that sat on the counter. Halfway through filling another container, he heard Sylvia come back from her shopping adventure. "Well," she said, shopping bags fluttering as she came into the kitchen, "I had to knock some old lady over, and I'm pretty sure my face is hanging somewhere in a Walmart backroom of people to throw out, but I think I got everything on our kids' Christmas list." Her joking smile turned into something more akin to, "Really?" as she saw Dave putting away the turkey. "Had a little nap before you started on those leftovers, huh?" she asked playfully. "Nah," Dave said, his attention on the turkey as he carved a long piece and tossed it into the bucket. "I've been carving for hours." Sylvia whistled as she looked at the huge container of turkey already in the fridge. "My goodness, I guess my turkey wasn't up to par." Dave shook his head. "Watch this," his face very close to the area he had just cut off the turkey. As Sylvia turned her attention to the bird, it was hard to miss as the flesh grew back into the spot he had just cut. Sylvia let her mouth slip open, casting a glance at the kitchen door as her sister tried to coax Terry off the couch so they could return home. "What the hell was that?" "I was hoping you could tell me. Where did you get this turkey?" "From Kroger. Same place I always get it." Dave went to the garbage, digging out the plastic covering and reading the label. It looked normal, a thin, flesh-colored bag with some plastic netting inside to hold the bird, but the label looked different than he was used to. A large Technicolor sun was rising up behind a barn, and the words Bright Farms were visible before it. Bright Farms wasn't a brand that Dave was familiar with, but as he watched Sylvia cut slice after slice off the turkey, he had to say it was a brand that was growing on him. Sylvia laughed at the large Tupperware as it bulged with bird meat. "Weird, but in a good way. What do we do with all this meat?" Dave shrugged. "I'm sure this is just some kind of fluke. We'll enjoy it while it lasts." "Do we put it in the fridge, you think? Would that ruin it?" she asked, indicating the turkey. Dave just shrugged again, and the two made room for the almost full turkey as they closed everything up and went to bed. Dave figured that putting in the cold would end whatever good fortune they had had, but he hardly wanted to wake up to a rotten turkey. Besides, it couldn't last forever. "Ugh, turkey again?" Ella asked, moving the turkey around her plate as she glowered at the golden meat. "I like it," said Claire, their youngest, as she spooned mashed potatoes onto her plate. "It's yummy." "There are starving kids right here in town, Els," Dave said good-naturedly. "Might as well eat." "Wait," Ella said suddenly. "This isn't the turkey from Thanksgiving, is it?" Dave looked at Sylvia, the two sharing a look that their oldest daughter definitely noticed. "That's disgusting! Thanksgiving was 2 weeks ago. There's no way it's still good." It was actually closer to 3, Dave realized, but time had done nothing to stop the turkey from coming back. Ella had raised an eye when she saw the thing sitting in the fridge still. "It's fine, dear. Your father and I have eaten it, and it tastes just fine. Eat up before it gets cold." They had put it in the air fryer to heat it up, but it always came out just as crispy and golden as it had the first time. The meat never spoiled, even when Sylvia had accidentally left the Tupperware out overnight, and the family had carried on eating it. Dave found it delicious, and Sylvia had joked that she had outdone herself this year. They had been eating turkey regularly ever since Thanksgiving, and no one but Ella seemed to show any signs of stopping. "I'll pass," Ella said, pushing the plate away. "I've been having weird dreams lately. I think it might be the turkey." Dave started to chide her for wasting food, but he too had been having some pretty weird dreams. He couldn't say it was due to the turkey, but it certainly had played a part. Dave had woken up a few times in the kitchen, the fridge door open and pieces of turkey still in his hand. The dreams themselves were usually flashbacks to the Thanksgiving, watching the guests eat and eat as the turkey centerpiece grew to fill the table. The guests grew too, Dave included, though that part seemed grounded in reality. He'd put on 10 pounds in the last few weeks. but he had shrugged it off as holiday weight. With Thanksgiving over and Christmas quickly approaching, there were no end of holiday parties or potlucks at work. Dave watched as Claire took her sister's turkey, as Ella left to go to her room. "Don't worry, Dad," Claire assured him. "I won't let it go to waste." Dave smiled, ruffling his daughter's hair, but noticed a certain roundness to her face. Ella looked about the same as ever, but as Sylvia wolfed down her own turkey, Dave couldn't help but notice that his weight gain wasn't the only new addition to the family. He put it out of his mind as he returned to his dinner. It was just a little holiday weight, nothing more. Dave pursed his lips when he opened the door to find his sister-in-law on the porch. It was the middle of the day. Shouldn't she be at work? "Hey, Stacy, what's up?" She smiled, but it looked a little strained. "Hey, Dave, I was just wondering if you had any more of that turkey." She was trying to put it off as curiosity, but her demeanor made Dave think she was on drugs or something. She was shuffling from foot to foot and scratching her arm, and Dave was a little worried about her. She'd been coming around a lot lately, and he didn't think he'd ever seen her over quite so much. It appeared that Sylvia was giving her turkey. It wasn't like they didn't have plenty of it, but it appeared to be having a negative effect on her. "Sure, I guess. Are you feeling okay? You seem kind of under the weather." "Yeah, I'm okay. I'm just hoping you've got some of that turkey. It's so good. I can't get enough of it. Terry, too. He's been taking it for lunch every day." As she followed him inside, rambling all the way, Dave noticed that he wasn't the only one that had put on a little holiday weight. Stacy had never been very large. At 4'11", she might have weighed 100 pounds the whole time Dave had known her, but now it was clear that she'd been eating more than usual. Her stick-thin frame was getting a little pudgy, and Dave wondered again if it had something to do with all the turkey they were eating. She followed him to the fridge, and sure enough, the turkey was still there in all its glory. The whole bird sat within as 2 tubs of meat sat on either side like silent sentries. He reached for the smaller tub, but changed his mind as he reached for the 2-gallon instead. He could always carve some more. If she had enough, maybe she wouldn't need to come back for a while. The thought was strange to Dave, but he suddenly found himself feeling very protective of the turkey. Stacy looked at the Tupperware of meat as if Dave had just handed her a stack of crisp $100 bills. Thank you so much," she breathed out, sounding relieved as she hugged the container to her chest. She left in a hurry after that, saying they would see them at Christmas for sure, and Dave was left wondering what the hell had just happened. As he watched her go, Dave suddenly wanted to call her back. He wanted to stop her, to tackle her, to take the turkey back, and as he closed the door, he ran heavily back to the fridge, his mind crying out for the delicious meat. He sank his hands into the turkey, pulling out chunks as he pushed it into his mouth. The turkey continued to refresh itself between each bite, the gouges growing before Dave's eyes, and when he sank to the floor at long last, he felt a sense of fulfillment that he'd never felt before. He was showering that night when he noticed the first of the bumps. He felt them through the washcloth as he soaped up, and his fingers shook a little as he dropped the wash rag. They were under his arms, a large patch that stretched down his side, and when Dave checked them in the bathroom mirror, he was shocked. He had thought maybe they were a rash, but the bumps looked less like pustules and more like lesions. The little bumps seemed to be spreading, and Dave didn't like the scaly patches of skin between them either. "What the hell?" he breathed, shivering as his fingers slid over the spots. It felt kind of nice, tickly even, but Dave made a mental note to call the doctor the next day. He'd been meaning to talk to Dr. Malcolm for a while anyway. The weight gain he was experiencing had gone beyond the normal holiday pudge, and the dreams were becoming worse and worse each night. The guests at the table now seemed to be changing before his eyes, eating the turkey as they grew round and squat, their limbs shrinking as their bodies twisted. Their skin would brown, crisping until it looked burnt, and as they all turned to look at him, Dave would come awake with a start. He was becoming worried that there might be something in the turkey that was affecting them negatively. He had noticed Claire and Sylvia seemed to be getting rounder as the days went by, and there was definitely more waddle to their gait than actual stride. He could see himself getting stouter as well, and with the exception of Ella, he felt like all of them might be experiencing a certain amount of binge eating. He could see his family fattening up, but for what? Dave thought for the first time then about getting rid of the turkey, but he wondered how his family would take such an action. Ella would be elated. She'd been cooking her own food to get away from the constant stream of turkey, but Sylvia and Claire would be outraged. They had turkey for breakfast, lunch, and dinner most days, and Dave realized that he was just as guilty. What had started as a cost-saving measure had become an obsession, and Dave wasn't sure he could bring himself to part with that cursed bird either. As he climbed into bed, something made all the more difficult as he had gotten fatter. He put his hand on something coarse that had made its way under his pillow. As he rolled under the covers, Sylvia already snoring beside him, he pulled it out and was surprised to find a handful of feathers under his pillow. He checked his pillow, thinking maybe there was a hole in it, but he couldn't find a source. He was tired by the time he got done and decided to get some sleep. He'd make an appointment tomorrow. Maybe Dr. Malcolm could shed some light on all this. Dave felt the phone shake in his hand as he made the call. The phone number to Bright Farms had been easy enough to find, but as it rang and rang, Dave became worried that no one would pick up. They had to have answers. They had to be responsible for this turkey, after all. Someone had to have some answers, otherwise Dave thought he might just go crazy. Dr. Malcolm certainly hadn't been able to give him any. Dr. Malcolm had only offered more questions. "I don't know what to tell you," Malcolm had said, running his hand over the bumps as he pressed against them. Dave had shuddered. The bumps had spread to his back, and he felt humiliated by the whole experience. He'd been sitting in his gown, 50 pounds heavier than the last time he'd been here a few months ago, feeling like a freak as the bumps covered his ample flesh. As he got undressed, he noticed he had some of them that had migrated to his chest as well, and Dave hoped that Doc might be able to give him some good news. "They aren't pustules or folliculitis, and there doesn't appear to be any drainage from them that I could see. They don't ooze when squeezed, and the x-rays don't show any growths below the skin. It's not a rash or something dermatological. I can't really tell what's going on, but it almost seems like..." He stopped himself, shaking his head as he flopped onto the spindly stool near the wall. "What?" Dave asked, ready to grasp at any straw he might offer. "It almost looks like under a bird's feathers. After you pluck them, their skin looks a lot like that. But that's stupid," he added, laughing a little as he made a note on Dave's chart. Dave agreed, chuckling a little, though he didn't think it sounded so stupid. He had looked up the number shortly after getting home. Dave didn't know what he expected this Bright Farms to tell him, but he knew he needed answers. In his mind, these guys would know what was going on. Maybe they could help shed some light on the situation. With every ring that passed, Dave was more and more certain that no one would pick up. The number would be old. They'd be closed. No one would know what he was talking about. No one would... Someone picked up on the sixth ring, just as Dave was getting ready to hang up. "Bright Farms General Store, Thomas here. How can I help you?" Dave was stunned for a moment, the man having to say hello a couple of times before finally finding the saliva or the words to speak. "Yeah, we bought one of your turkeys this year for Thanksgiving." "Uh-huh," the man said, David hearing a scritch-scratch of a pen. "If you're trying to make a return, you can take it back to the store. We don't have any special return policy or anything." "No, I was just trying to get some information on your products. My turkey seems to be coming back after I cut it, and I'd like to know if there's any side effects from this kind of thing." "Coming back?" the man said, and then Dave heard him gasp, but not like someone who's surprised. He gasped like someone who's seen a celebrity. "Oh my goodness, it's you! You're one of the chosen ones. I've never got to meet one of you before the change. This is amazing. It's an honor, sir. I hope you know how lucky you are. He only chooses a handful every year, and it happens to less than 1% of all those that buy our birds." "What are you talking about?" Dave asked, not sure what to make of all this. "Oh, I'm sorry. It's been 3 weeks. I assumed you'd have already noticed some changes." "What exactly are these changes?" Dave asked, hearing the front door open as the kids came home from school. Ella went straight to her room as she had every day, but Claire made a beeline for the kitchen. Dave could see her as she waddled in, her own change even more noticeable than his own. As she opened the fridge, he was unsurprised to hear the sound of the seal coming off the turkey container. He saw his daughter, normally very athletic and energetic, laboring to breathe as she put the turkey and gravy on a paper plate. Her ankles had begun to thicken, and Dave almost thought he could see something like scales in the patches of flesh between her socks and jeans. Her teacher had called last week about her poor performance, and about how she'd been eating in class, which was not allowed. She'd been sneaking extra turkey to school to eat between meals, and her teacher was threatening to give her detention if she didn't stop. Well, dry patches of skin, bumps, weight gain, sharpening of the bone structure. Have you noticed any feathers appearing randomly yet? That's a big tell. She came out of the fridge with her cheeks already bulging with turkey, and Dave couldn't help but notice the feathers in her hair. As she walked to her room, the plate piled high, the turkey feathers wafted down from her lustrous brown locks. "Don't worry, pal," Thomas went on, clearly grinning on the other end of the phone. "I know this is a lot to take in. We'll send someone over real soon to help walk you through it. Before you know it, you'll also have a new home in the field." Dave let the phone fall to the floor, his feet taking him towards the bathroom in a wobbly gait. He leaned in close as he looked at himself in the mirror, smoothing out the skin on his face as he looked. His face seemed normal, but Dave couldn't help scrutinizing every feature. The bags under his eyes made sense. His dreams had been plagued by the eating dream for almost a month. His skin appeared plumper, but still normal, though Dave couldn't help but see things that may or may not be there. Was his nose sharper? Were his eyes smaller? He looked under his neck, the double chin now very prominent, and he thought there might be some bumps under there too. Maybe one of those chins looked a little like a waddle? He tried to tell himself that it was all in his head, but the longer he looked, the more certain he was that nothing was as he remembered. "What are you doing?" came a voice from behind him, and Dave realized that Sylvia had come home. He turned to tell her everything was okay, but as the tears started falling, Dave fell heavily to his knees and clutched at her. "I'm scared, Sylvia. I don't know what's going on. I'm changing, and I don't know what..." But she put a finger on his lips, and she stooped down, bringing her face close to his. He could see the bumps rising up her neck as they came close, and the longer he looked at her face, the more her nose began to look like a beak. "You're just hungry, dear. Come on, let's get some dinner in you. You'll feel better after that." Dave tried to shake his head, but as she helped him up to lead him to the table, he became less and less sure. Claire was already waiting for them, her eyes glazed over a little as she stared into space. Sylvia was at the table too, feathers rising from the neck of her sweater. And Terry was there too, his nose having taken on the sharp point of a beak as he turned to look at Dave. When he opened his mouth, nothing but a gobble came out, and Dave felt his fear rising up again as Sylvia sat him down beside the turkey man. He wanted to run, he wanted to deny all this, but when she sat the golden brown idol before them, he felt the drool slide down the corners of his mouth and knew that he couldn't leave. They all fell on the bird, ripping and eating as the meat returned as pristine as always, again and again. Dave's fears were nothing before the bird, and as he ate, the people around him grew and grew. Their bodies changed, their features twisted, and when Dave tried to mention it, nothing came out but a thick guttural warble. Soon he wasn't even grabbing the meat anymore. His hands had shrunk into useless wings, and they were all digging mouthfuls of flesh with their sharp beaks. A scream turned their heads towards the living room, and they could all see Ella as she stood in confusion. She retreated then, her door slamming from farther down the hall, but it hardly seemed to matter. The rafter of turkeys turned back to their dead cousin and continued to eat, growing fatter and fatter as they gorged themselves. Thomas found the door unlocked, and as he and his brothers and sisters came into the house, he smiled at the scene before him. 5 fat turkeys, still picking at the bones of their meal as they warbled and gobbled. 3 hens and 2 toms. Not a bad haul at all. They made quite a mess, but that was okay. There would be nothing here for the police to find when they came to investigate. Certainly nothing to tie them to Bright Farms. "Load them up," Thomas said, his family going to work. "We got a few more stops to make before we head back." They herded the birds out the door, running them towards the truck that they had pulled up to the front door, so they didn't have to chase any of them. There were always questions when people saw them running down the road in their overalls and Amish dresses, which led to other unexplained disappearances. It was always better when they came to see the light on their own, but converts sometimes had to be made rather than found. "Who are you? What's going on?" Thomas looked over and saw a girl coming up the hallway. She looked to be about 12 or 13, and scared out of her mind. It appeared that the siren song of the bird had ensnared her, but Thomas knew there was a greater call than that of the turkey. He bent down, giving her his widest smile, as she looked at him with open fear. "My dear, have you ever heard of the bright? I find it helps put things in perspective during trying times like this." Dave had never been so happy in his whole life. Being a turkey was easy. Eat, sleep, make little turkeys, and wander the fields around his new home. There was no job to go to, no mortgage to pay, no parties to attend, no conversations to carry, no expectations to live up to. No, he thought as he dug his beak into the ground for more bugs, he was wrong about expectations. Even as a turkey, there was one expectation. He looked up as a group of birds was led to the waiting trailer, their heads held high as they waddled to their destiny. Dave could see a few of them that seemed to have a slight glow inside them, and he knew how lucky they were. There would be some new faces in a few weeks, and Dave knew that soon it would be his turn as well. Easter, or maybe next Thanksgiving, and then he too would fulfill his own expectation. Maybe his glow would grow before that day, and he would be responsible for ushering in some new faces as well. Someone called the turkeys to lunch, and the rafter came running. Dave looked up at the smiling girl holding the bucket, and thought he recognized her for a moment. She looked familiar, her long dark hair in a braid, and a name tried to work its way to the surface before Dave pushed it down, even as he pushed his face into the trough. That was something he had cared about before he'd been a turkey, and the food in the trough was the only thing he cared about now. Eat, sleep, make little turkeys, and grow fat. That was how a turkey fulfilled his destiny. I looked at the sign over the register and scoffed loudly. It hung above the bowl of fortune cookies like a silent guardian, and it had never made any sense to me. Customers are cautioned to take one fortune cookie. Taking more than one cookie may be hazardous to the customer's health and sanity. Management. I'd been coming to Yinshi Guzo for the last 10 years, and that sign had always sort of made me roll my eyes. The food this place made was well worth the 5-minute walk from my house, and I had never gotten sick here as I had at other Chinese restaurants. The food was great, the price was fair, and the customer service was second to none. Yinshi Guzo was a place I came to when I was depressed. It was the place I came to when I was celebrating, or when I just needed some comfort food at the end of a long day. It was my all-time favorite restaurant, and I couldn't think of anywhere I'd rather eat. I had actually met my wife here 5 years ago, in fact. Her date stood her up, and I was coming in for some takeout. We both sat in the waiting area, her hoping for a table, since the place was bustling, and me just waiting for my takeout, and struck up a conversation. By the time my food came, she had asked me to stay and eat with her, and I agreed. A year later, we were married, and we've been together ever since, and coming back to Yinshi Guzo as well. I was here again on a Friday night, date night for me and Lisa, waiting for our usual. Sesame chicken with pork fried rice for her, General Tso with white rice for me, and an egg roll each. It was crowded. Yinshi Guzo was always crowded. As I stood before the counter, the sign irked me as I saw it again, probably because the cookies here were my all-time favorite part of the meal. The owner is a world-class pastry chef, as well as a great cook. He makes the cakes for the shop, and his fried cheesecake is to die for. I think his fortune cookies, though, are the best I've ever had. I know that some of you are going to tell me that fortune cookies aren't an authentic Asian delicacy, but this guy has embraced them at Yinshi Guizhou. He makes them from scratch, putting the fortunes in himself, and they're so buttery and delicious that I could eat them by the ton. He refuses to sell them, though, saying that they're only meant to be enjoyed one at a time, and I can't imagine how much money he loses making them like that. Wrapped delicately in their paper holders, they mocked me from the bowl as I stood looking. Leaning forward, I grabbed about 6 of them and popped them into my pocket. I couldn't tell you why I did it, not really, but it was something that I would come to regret. "Your order, sir," said the voice of Miss Kim as she came back. I jumped, looking guiltily as I smiled and thanked her for the food. As I turned to go, I heard her say something almost too low to hear. "Be careful with those. Remember the rules, sir. I turned back, but she had disappeared behind the curtain that separated the front from the back already. I shook it off. I must have misheard her, I thought to myself, as I took my food and left. I traversed the street, weaving between couples and clumps of people on their way downtown, as I made my way home. As I walked, I felt the cookies shuffling around in my pocket and decided to have one. I reached in and pulled out the hand-wrapped paper cover, looking at the little message scrawled on the outside. Good fortune had been written on it, and I opened the wrapper and picked the fortune out as I ate the delicious cookie in a single bite. It was still soft and warm, and the cookie tasted fresh from the oven. They always seemed to taste like that, and I assumed he made them fresh every day. I looked down at the little paper and thought for a moment that it might have been handwritten, too. Did the owner handwrite his fortunes or something? That level of detail really made these all the more special. I smiled as I read the fortune. Even if it was handwritten, it was still kind of generic for a fortune cookie. Tumultuous times are right around the corner. Aren't they always, I said to myself, putting my key into the lock as I stepped inside. 10 minutes later, I had the wine chilling in the sink, the food transferred to plates, and I'd found the perfect movie on Netflix for us to cuddle up and watch together. I had it all arranged and ready for her. As I switched over to regular TV, the movie primed and ready to play, I looked at my watch and tisked. It was already 8:30. She should have been here by now. She had been working late these past few days, and I was beginning to become worried. I reached into my pocket and pulled out another of the delicious little cookies. I stopped before unwrapping this one, reading the handwritten message on the outside before I opened it. 1 per visit. Don't forget the rules. I felt my brow furrow a little. That was weird. What an odd thing to write on the wrapping of a cookie. I shrugged and pulled it out of its wrapper, pulling the fortune out as I ate the cookie. This one was good, but not as good as they usually were. It was buttery, but a little dry. Tasted like a leftover from yesterday's batch. A sports center came on. I looked at the scrap of paper inside and blew air out in a little chuckle. A loved one is thinking of you. Another classic. My phone rang about that time, and I picked it up, looking at the picture displayed on the home screen. Lisa's smiling face decorated the screen, and I smiled to myself as I picked it up. Hey, honey, you almost here? I got everything ready for date night. Her breathing on the other end was heavy, and it took her a minute to compose herself. Babe, I need to tell you something. I need you to not interrupt me, okay? That made me nervous. Lisa sounded panicked, and I didn't like the thought of her driving while she was in that state. I could hear the sound of her engine in the background, and it sounded like she was driving very fast. I looked at the clock and realized it was later than I thought. Traffic could be nuts this time of night, and I wish she would pull over. Are you okay? You sound like you're... Just listen, and don't interrupt, okay? Okay, I said, hoping this would calm her down a little bit. I took out another one of the cookies as she prepared to speak and unwrapped it absent-mindedly, taking the fortune out with a deft hand. I'm pregnant, she said quickly, in a way that made me think she was expecting me to be upset. Quite the contrary. We had been trying to have a baby for years, but couldn't seem to make it stick. We thought we'd finally made it work a few months ago, but she had ended up miscarrying, and it had hit her really hard. She had really fallen into work, staying late and working on her off days, and these date nights had become our only real time to be together. The news that she was having a baby made me ecstatic. I was confused as to why she was so upset. The cookie was dry as I crunched on it. This one was definitely stale. That's wonderful, dear, I said, through a mouthful of cookie. I'm so happy you... It's not yours, she exclaimed, and the cookie turned to ash in my mouth. I felt it stick in my throat, a dry paste turning to cement, and I hacked it up and spat it on the carpet. It looked a little off as it sat in the congealing mass there, but my mind was not on the cookie. Not mine. How could that be? I've been having an affair for the last 3 months. When we lost Davin, I couldn't get over the depression. Someone at work had been flirting with me for a while, and one night oh God, babe, I don't know what to do. She was crying, and I could already hear it turning jagged and ugly. I wanted to be angry. I tried to be furious, but I couldn't in the face of her sobbing. Come home. We'll work this out, Lisa. We can... Huh? She huffed out, and I heard a loud pop of static before the line went dead. Hello? Hello? Lisa, are you there? Hello? But there was no one. I sat forward, bumping the table and sending the plates I had made spilling onto the ground. I heard the dry snap of the other 2 cookies as they crumbled in my pocket, but I hardly noticed. I tried calling her back, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again and again, becoming more frantic with each phone call until I finally bounced it off the carpet floor in a rage. What the hell was going on? What had happened to Lisa? I felt something papery against my palm, and when I looked up, I saw the fortune was plastered against it. I caught sight of the words, and it quelled my rage with cold fear. Your joy will quickly become ashes in your mouth. What the hell was that? That wasn't a normal fortune. Fortunes from cookies were almost always benign, or at least neutral. Did the owner write these himself? Who the hell would put a thing like that in a cookie? I stared at it for a few minutes before retrieving my phone and trying to call her back. The screen was cracked, but that hardly seemed to matter anymore. As my phone remained silent and hers remained unreachable, I was becoming scared. What if something had happened? The fortune continued to nag at me. So far, each of them had been accurate in their own way. What the heck was going on here? This was too elaborate for a prank, and if it was, it really wasn't amusing. I had started to clean up the food I had spilled when the phone finally began to ring. I grabbed it up and prayed that it would be her face I'd see on the screen. Instead, it was a blocked number. It looked odd through the star pattern of my broken glass, and I sat it down. I could once again feel the broken cookies poking at me from my pocket. I reached in and threw both of them on the table. One of them had come unwrapped, and the fortune stuck to my finger as my hand came free. My curious mind would not allow me to ignore it, though. But now I wished I had. You will receive 2 phone calls. Both will bring you only sorrow. I caught the still ringing phone on the 4th ring. Hello? Lisa? I asked hopefully. Hello. Are you the emergency contact for Miss Lisa Callahan? I am, I answered, unsure of what it wanted. This is Officer Winsman. I'm afraid there's been an accident. Is my wife okay? I asked, still a little hopeful. The officer was silent for a few seconds. I'm gonna need you to come down to St. Mark's and identify her remains. The phone slipped out of my hand again, and I could hear the officer saying hello from the carpet. The last cookie sat on the table, ominous in its white paper holder. The edges of the paper were black, whatever was inside having seeped into it. The covering bore a legend that made my breath hitch, and though I felt my hands reach to open it, I wanted nothing so much as to throw it out the window unread. The black letter on the front read, "Those who do not follow the rules are doomed to live with the consequences." My shaking fingers found the white paper just as the phone went silent. I've been lying on the floor of my apartment, smelling the aroma of old Chinese food for the last 3 hours. I don't know what to do. Someone came to knock on my door, but I ignored them. They said they were with the police, but I don't care. Lisa is lost to me, and I fear that may not be the end. I'm almost glad that it may not be the end. The world outside has quieted some as the night stretches on, and I continue to lay on the carpet in the fetal position, using what may be my last few hours to write this message. The black stuff that poured out of that wrapper, bits of moldy cookie floating amongst it, was nothing next to the message that oozed onto the surface. Your end will not be so quick as hers, it said. So if you read this, and you should see that sign telling you only to take 1 cookie, remember that the rules are there for a reason, and those who do not obey them may be forced to live with the consequences. The following was found scribbled on the back of a log after the night of October 5th, 2008. Attention, night shift staff. Be advised that there is a water restriction in place until further notice. The water has been determined to contain a harmful chemical that may cause extreme health risks. The warden will advise when the water restriction is lifted. I looked over at the day shift officer, who was collecting his things and preparing to leave. What's all this about? He looked at me absent-mindedly and scrunched his face up in deep thought. I relieved McMillan most days, and he always managed to look like conscious thought was a lot of effort. He never struck me as a deep thinker. The longer I interacted with him, the more I realized that the department's standards were slipping pretty low if he had made the cut. McMillan looked like the effort of flexing all 12 of his brain cells might start a fire, and it took him a few minutes before he came up with an answer. "Oh yeah, not supposed to use the water. Major said so when he came to put up the sign." I rolled my eyes. McMillan had told me nothing that I couldn't have gleaned from the notice. "Yeah, but for how long?" "Till you hear otherwise, I guess," he said with a shrug. Then he left, and it was just me in the dorm and 150 warm bodies. This was gonna make my life just ducky, I could already tell. The complaints started almost immediately. The heat from McMillan's backside hadn't even adequately cooled from the chair before I got my first complaint of the night. The dorm I was in had 4 quads that held about 30 to 40 people per quad. On average, I have about 120 people, and tonight they were all mad about the lack of water. The fellow at the squawk box, his finger smashing the button hard enough to go through the wall, looked like he ate push-ups and crapped sit-ups on the daily. He was bald, his black beetle eyes staring out of a face that looked like it was shaped from clay. He was looking at me through the glass as he pressed the talk button, which was making a loud click in my office. I depressed the talk button on my end and asked what he wanted. "So, we can't use the water?" I stared at him through the glass and let him know how great a question that was with my most convincing, "you're a real genius, champ" expression. "That's what the sign says, don't it?" "So then, how are we supposed to take showers?" "You aren't." He looked back at me, his face looking like he might come up with another question if I was willing to wait. "What are we supposed to drink?" he said, just as I had given up on a follow-up question. "I don't know. I'm sure someone with a higher rate of pay than me will sort that out." "What about," I rode over him, "if it's related to water, there isn't any, so stop bothering me." And that was how I spent the first hour and a half of my night. Different representatives from each quad would approach the box, their questions taking on different levels of elocution, until I finally announced that there was no water. I didn't know when the water would be back. If it made them feel any better, I also didn't have any water to drink. And it didn't look like management was going to send me any either. So, unless their further questions had to do with something other than water and when it was going to come back on, I had no answers. After that, I sat in my chair, found a book that someone had left, and began to read. I could see them out of the corner of my eyes, though. Some of them had taken the news meekly, but most had formed into tight little angry groups that seemed to be holding individual powwows about the water situation. I saw a lot of furtive looks cast my way, but I didn't let on that I had seen them and just kept reading. The situation was out of my hands. If management wanted to send down some water kegs or plastic bottles or a goddamn tidal wave to wash us all to hell, that was fine with me. The weirdness didn't happen until about 8. No one had come to help me count, so I just hadn't gone out to count at 7 o'clock. This was not uncommon, but no one had called to bother me about it either. No one showing up might be an everyday occurrence, but the control room not shouting about it was something different. Control liked to have their count on time, damn it. If it wasn't called in, then there was hell to pay, and their lack of communication was unsettling. The radio hadn't made any noise either, but that was nothing to get excited about. I might have had a bad radio. It was always possible that, for once, no one had anything to say. These thoughts soon slipped out of my mind, however, when Wharton approached the fountain. Now, Wharton was a typical MA. He was slight, pigeon-chested, with a uniform that hung off him and a shaved head that was sprinkled with stubble. While the others had been holding a council, Wharton had been staring at the water fountain. After about an hour and a half, I'd only been pretending to read my book, and was instead staring at him over the top of the Stephen King novel I had found under the desk. His simple, inbred face was held in the mirage-like grip of the silver drinking fountain, and he darted his tongue across his parched lips as he thought about the bounty that must be inside. He had likely drunk something today, a beverage with lunch, or a sip of something cool from the keg they kept on the yard that was refilled by maintenance. But it's strange how being told that you can't have something makes it so important to you. I watched as he got up after staring at the thing for nearly an hour and a half. He walked over to press the button, and I expected nothing to come out but a little puff of air and disappointment. To my surprise, a stream of water arced into the bowl of the fountain. Wharton looked at it with surprise, as a smile stretched across his face and he began to drink. The others in Quad 2 looked over at Wharton and seemed to notice that the water was working again. They glared over at me. Why hadn't I told them about this revelation? They went to stand behind Wharton as he drank from the fountain. wanting their turn at the cold, crisp water. His smiling face was gulping it down as he looked euphoric, but after a few moments, his laughing friends became less friendly. They slapped at Wharton, wanting to drink some of the water as well. The bald one who had asked the initial question pushed him out of the way like a rag doll, sending him sprawling as he bent to drink. Wharton lumbered up like a wild animal, and the brute had taken no more than a few sips before Wharton threw him from the fountain violently, his head leaving a red smear across the wall. Wharton bent to the fountain like a starving animal. He gulped down mouthfuls of water, the rest sliding down his chin. The big bald brute came shakily back to his feet, a cut on his head leaking blood, and grabbed Wharton by the shoulders. I thought he might beat him to death right there. Instead, he tossed him back into the day room like a sack of trash. Wharton slammed into the concrete bench, his arm bending strangely as the other man went back to drinking the water. The others who had walked over with him stepped away, not wanting any part of what was going on. To my surprise, Wharton got up and staggered towards the fountain again. His arm was quite clearly broken, but he lifted the wounded hand to his mouth and sucked the blood coming from his purpling hand. I looked back to the guy at the fountain and saw that he hadn't even noticed Wharton approaching. He was drinking water like he'd never seen the stuff. The water was sliding down his chin, his throat working furiously as he guzzled it down, oblivious to the world. I turned back to Wharton and sucked in air as I noticed the shank in his unbroken hand. He had curled his broken arm to his chest, shuddering as it spasmed, but his other hand had found a short, crude little weapon made from twisted metal. He ran up to the drinker, and as his friends called out, it was too late. Wharton stabbed him a dozen times, but the drinker never stopped, never even winced, as Wharton rammed the knife into his kidneys. When the drinker slid down the fountain, his lips were still sucking at air like a nursing infant. As Wharton took his place, standing over the corpse as he drank, I heard panicked banging coming from the other side of the dorm. Robinson was my houseman in Quad 3. He was an older lifer who made the best of his situation and never complained. I had seen him many mornings in the day room, a cup of coffee in one hand and yesterday's paper in the other, taking his ease before he started cleaning for the day. He was an amiable guy, and I found that I liked him as far as inmates went. He was not the one knocking at the glass. His roommate, a redhead named Griggs, was banging on the glass window that separated him from the hallway and pointing to the shower in the corner. Quad 1 inmates weren't the only ones to discover that the water was off limits, but not off. I could see Robinson kneeling on the floor of the filthy shower, naked as the day he was born, his head lifted to catch the water falling from the shower head. There were others there too, 3 or 4 who had been trying to get him out of the shower and were now just as powerless to leave as he was. They were also catching the water, mouths open and elbows prodding for a better position. They looked like worshippers who had recently discovered manna from heaven. Their faces were masks of ecstasy as the water cascaded down the drain. The inmates in 3 stood watching them, some of them laughing, but others scared as they banged on the glass and tried to get out. I picked up my radio and called for medical. I had no other choice. I had an inmate bleeding in Quad 1, and I had several others displaying strange behavior. The protocols were very clear on what I had to do. I had to get someone down here to help. I called for emergency traffic, called for medical, and an A-team response. After 5 seconds of nothing, though, I called it again. The static had a pregnant dread about it as I stood staring into the walkie. The A-team response usually brought all kinds of people running. I was literally feet from the captain's office, and the fact that I didn't yet have people banging on the window was very odd. When I picked up the phone and didn't get so much as a dial tone, that was when I really started freaking out. The glass tinkled to the ground as I pulled out the emergency keys. I wasn't supposed to leave the station unattended, but this seemed like one of those emergency situations they talk about in training. I'd signed whatever incident report I had to after I'd gotten some help. I was way beyond freaked out, and I needed someone to laugh at me and say this was normal. Tell me how this was nothing compared to the riots of blah blah or the incident in blah blah. The key slid easily into the lock, but the maglock wouldn't release when I put my shoulder against the door. I slammed against the door, the lock disengaged, but the door refusing to open. I crashed against it again and again, my shoulder burning, my nerves turned up to 1,000,000. I had to get out. Suddenly this station was about 2 sizes too small, and I needed fresh air and the sound of crickets. I needed to run up the concrete road to the control room, uniform left behind me, and not stop until I was sitting in my car, just my boxer shorts and my undershirt. I could hear the other quads banging, seeing what was going on from various vantage points, and wanting escape or answers or just reassurance. Instead, I slid down the door, sitting on the concrete floor and letting all the anxiety crash over me. It's midnight now, and they've all mostly gone quiet. I managed to make it back to the desk, posting up by the phone in case it starts working again. I wished at first that I had stayed where I was. The quads have devolved into war zones. Inmates fought over petty gang feuds, fought over misguided fear, or fought over the precious water that they all now craved. I can see some of them at the fountain now, but there are others in the shower with their mouths open and the water soaking through their cheap prison uniforms. Others are in their cells, heads under sinks, or even in the toilets as they drink and drink and drink. Wharton is still at his fountain. The others have left him alone as they search for their own water, or just hide and wait for all this to be over. He's been drinking for hours, his body expanding as he threatens to burst. I can see dark spots on his pants where he's messed himself, and I imagine there are dark spots under his clothes too, where his organs or blood vessels have burst due to swelling. His smile, though, is the most cherubic thing I've ever seen. It makes me wonder what he's experiencing as he gorges himself on water. I find myself looking at the fountain in the station and longing to find out. It's only been a few hours, but I can feel my tongue sticking to the roof of my mouth as I watch the quads devolve into madness. It's funny what you miss when you can't have it, right? A few hours without water begins to feel like 1,000 years. Even though I know it would kill me, I still want it. I figure this will be the last thing I write before I go to the fountain. Maybe our water isn't tainted. Perhaps it's just the inmates' water that holds whatever this is. It hardly matters. I'm so thirsty now. It doesn't look like help is coming anytime soon. If anyone finds this, just know that I died smiling. Just know I didn't die thirsty.
The usual lunch special, Charles? Yeah, Damien, but no crab rangoon this time. Trying not to eat so many carbs. Whatever you say, dude, Damien said, ringing him up. To say that Charles ate a lot of Chinese food probably wouldn't put his problem in perspective. Charles had been lucky when the pandemic hit. He was a work-from-home computer tech who rarely left his house anyway, so working on projects from his apartment was pretty par for the course. He'd been getting lunch at Damien's for the better part of 8 years, and they had the best Chinese food within walking distance of his bungalow. Though COVID had put an end to him dining in, it hadn't stopped Charles from getting his fix. Quite the contrary, it had only made it worse. Charles ordered from Damien's 3 times a day. Breakfast was egg drop soup, and early morning rice at 10. Lunch was General Tso chicken, around 2 o'clock. Dinner was beef and broccoli with house soup and salad at 10, and was also the last delivery that Damien's made for the day. Charles honestly couldn't remember the last time he had cooked a meal for himself, and it just seemed easier to buy takeout. His programming job paid way more than he needed, especially after a lot of his coworkers had quit, and Charles was enjoying his shut-in lifestyle. When he heard the knock on his door, he rolled away from his keyboard and went to get his lunch. It was the short, dark-haired guy this time, the one who looked a little like Bruce Wayne. He didn't speak a lot of English, and Charles told him thanks as he took his food inside. Damien's only had about 3 delivery guys. The nerdy Bruce Wayne was the one who delivered most often. Charles had been hoping it would be Roger, though, the brown-haired Chad who liked to talk about Warhammer. But it appeared he'd have to wait till dinner time to see how he'd placed in last week's tournament. As a shut-in, Charles often had to live vicariously through those who braved the outside world. As Charles looked through the bag, ensuring everything was in there, he smiled as he saw his favorite part of the meal towards the bottom. It was silly, but Charles found that he really looked forward to those buttery yellow little cookies with the fortunes inside. He knew they were far from authentic cuisine, but he liked the cookies ever since he was a kid. Charles had about 100 of the fortunes pinned up on a corkboard, and sometimes he liked to read them and think about their meanings on days he'd gotten them. Had he found someone new when he got that fortune? Had he found untold fortune on that particular day? Looking at them so often was probably why he had noticed the phone number. Want more cookies? Call 1-800-555-2665. He had never really thought about it before. It was probably the number for the restaurant to resupply their fortune cookies. The fact that it appeared on the fortunes, something that were inside the cookies, was a little strange. How would the restaurant get the number if they handed out the cookies? It didn't really make sense for the people eating the cookies to need more cookies. And as Charles sat the food on his desk, he opened the cookie and fished out the fortune as he munched on the little cookie shell. Today, you will make a hasty decision that will change your life. Damn, Charles thought, that one was different. It seemed benign on the surface. Everyone made decisions that changed their life, didn't they? The message wasn't the weird part, though. It was the sinister undertones that Charles couldn't quite shake. Not just any decision, but a hasty one. He ate the other half of the cookie before adding this one to the corkboard, looking at the phone number that sat under the lucky numbers. Want more cookies? Call 1-800-555-2665. Charles grinned, turning back to his desk as he opened the rest of his food and began to eat. Who wouldn't want more cookies? Charles worked well into the night. By 11, he had fixed the problem in the code his boss had sent him. One of the other coders had been a little sloppy in the parameters, and as a result had caused the program to crash as often as it returned anything usable. Charles had fixed it, emailing his boss about 10, and had started bumming around on Reddit as he thought about what to do with the rest of his evening. He wasn't ready to turn in yet, but he wasn't really interested in any of the games he had in his Steam library. He was just kind of wasting time as he scrolled through Reddit when he came to a weird post about strange phone numbers. The poster was talking about how he had called a number he'd found and how the guitar instructor had turned out to be a real creep. They claimed he had later seen the man on America's Most Wanted, but Charles thought the last bit sounded like bullshit. The comments mostly agreed, but some of them had talked about other weird numbers they had called. Massage parlors that had turned out to be brothels, contractors that had later robbed the house they had renovated, weird number stations that called back when you hung up, everything in between. The more he read, the more Charles thought about the number on the fortune cookie. It couldn't hurt to call. Maybe it would even give him a cool story to tell to strangers on the internet. He walked over to the board, cell phone clutched in hand, as he read that old familiar legend again. Want more cookies? Call 1-800-555-2665. Charles dialed the number in that stilted way that people do when they dial a new number. He had to go back and try it again after putting the number in wrong the first time, and when it started ringing, Charles assumed that a machine would get it. They would probably just bury him in a phone tree, and he would never actually talk to a real person. Either that, or the number would ring twice and then tell him it had been disconnected. They had probably had these cookies out for a while, and the number would have changed or been liquidated altogether. The third ring had barely started when a bored-sounding woman picked up the phone. Hello? Charles blinked, and the woman had said hello once more before he finally shook it off and answered her. Yeah, I was calling about the cookies. Wonderful. We'll send them right out. Don't you need my address or my... No, sir. It's all taken care of. Thank you for your call. Then she hung up, and Charles was left staring out into space. Well, that had been weird, he thought. He figured it might be time to get ready for bed. The phone call had weirded him out, and he had another long day tomorrow. As he snugged down under his covers, he couldn't help but glance over at the fortunes on the corkboard. He wondered how long it would take them to send the cookies to his house. Would they send them all at once, or would this be a situation where they sent a few at a time? He fell asleep dreaming of the buttery little fortune cookies, and when he woke up, he decided that he must still be dreaming. His hands wrapped around the plastic film of a single fortune cookie, and as he opened it, he could smell the flaky aroma of the pastry inside. When he broke it open and felt the crumbs fall onto his chest, he opened his eyes and realized that it was no dream. The fortune cookie was tucked under his pillow, as if the tooth fairy had left him a buttery treat instead of a quarter. Charles looked at the fortune as he ate and was surprised to find not a fortune, but a thank you note. Thank you for your business. That was when he remembered the phone call from the night before. It was weird, but he couldn't see how the two could be connected. He must have just imagined eating the fortune cookie last night. Charles had no idea how it had gotten in his bed, but it was a nice surprise, nonetheless. He put in a call to Damien's, and when he sat down on the couch, the phone ringing as someone no doubt ran to grab it, he heard the crinkle of cellophane from under the couch cushions. Reaching under the cushion, Charles found another wrapped cookie, this one slightly broken from being sat on. "Hello? Charles, you ordering?" Damien's voice brought Charles back to reality, and he munched on the cookie as he placed his morning order. He was soon eating his breakfast, the cookie out of his mind, but he would think back on that day and decide that that had been the first appearance of the strange cookies. The next day, Charles found 12 individually wrapped cookies. They were all scattered around the apartment. They were tossed haphazardly around, some under the couch, some as far as the kitchenette. Charles couldn't exactly put them off as something he'd forgotten or misplaced. How had they gotten so spread across the living room? Then his eyes fell on a small takeout bag in the trash, and he felt like he knew the answer. Roger had delivered his food this morning, and he remembered telling him about the number he'd called to get more cookies. Roger had said it sounded a little spooky, and told him to let him know when the cookies arrived. Charles had gone to get his wallet so he could pay him, leaving Roger at the door. That must have been when he'd tossed the cookies into his house, probably thinking he was being funny. Charles nodded as he collected up the cookies, the explanation reassuring him until he remembered that it was almost time for dinner. Roger had delivered his food around 11, so how did Charles not notice the cookies for 8 hours? He put it out of his mind as he picked up the phone so he could order his dinner. The next day, Charles found 20 of the cookies scattered around his house again. Not all at once, of course. Charles had sat down to eat his breakfast when he found the first one under the couch. Then he stumbled across the line of 10 or 12 cookies stretched over the couch and to the far side of the kitchenette. They looked tossed haphazardly, and he gritted his teeth as he imagined Roger smirking as he covertly threw a handful of cookies into the apartment. He picked up one of the cookies, preparing to call Damien's and tell Roger how he'd gotten him good, when he remembered that Roger hadn't delivered his meal this morning. Roger wouldn't be there till noon today, and the other guy hadn't even known about the number. But if it wasn't Roger, then who else could it be? He tried to put it out of his mind, but when he found 4 more in the bathroom sink and 3 more in his bedroom, it was harder to overlook. He found more in the bathtub, but by then any thought that it might be a joke was over. None of the delivery guys could have gotten this far into his apartment. He was more confused than scared, but Charles really wanted some answers. When he called to place his lunch order, he was surprised to find Damien answering the phone again. Surprised, but not unhappy. "The usual?" Damien asked, and Charles could already hear his pencil scratching. "Yeah, but I got a question." "We don't do discounts for frequent customers," Damien joked, but he must have heard something he didn't like in Charles's voice. "No, nothing like that. I was wondering about where you get your fortune cookies from." "My uncle orders them. Why do you ask?" "Well, I recently started finding them around my house. It was just a few yesterday, but they were all over the house today. I found 20 of them so far, and the fact that no one's been in my house since right after COVID started is a little..." But Damien cut him off. The usual good-natured ribbing was gone. Charles believed that this was the most serious he'd ever heard Damien. "You called the numbers on the cookies, didn't you?" Charles' mouth went dry as he heard Damien get to the point. "Yeah, but I haven't gotten any cookies delivered. They just keep appearing in my house. I don't understand how this is happening, but I want to know how they're getting in." He was silent for a few seconds, and Charles thought he had hung up. When he spoke, Charles suddenly wished he had. "You can't stop it. There's no taking it back once the deal is made." He hung up on Charles then, and they refused to take his calls. Charles was on his own, it seemed. On the 3rd day, Charles found his couch covered in cookies, and he estimated there were about 50 in all. That was when Charles called the police. They came out and checked the house, but they couldn't find any sign of entry. Charles showed them the cookies, telling them how they had just appeared in the middle of the night, but he could tell they didn't believe him. They thought he was playing a joke, one at their expense, too, and they clearly didn't appreciate it. They told him they would look into it and to call back if it happened again, but Charles figured they would be another group that would ignore his phone calls. He tried to call Damien again, but no one picked up. He locked all the doors before bed, ensuring every window was secured, and checked every point of entry. He had told himself the night before that if it kept happening, he would get the landlord to change the locks. How else could they be getting in? This had to be a trick. Someone had too much time and they wanted to play a trick on him. Whether they were pranksters or not, Charles wanted this to stop. Charles lay on the couch, all the cookies swept into a pile in the corner, and hoped they would just be gone when he woke up in the morning. He awoke to find the floor of his apartment covered in the little yellow cookies. They crackled angrily as he set his feet down on them, and when he stood up, they were up to his ankles. As he trudged through them, he saw they covered the floor from the living room to the bedroom. The bathroom door opened with some pushing, and as he waded through them so he could use the toilet, Charles was racked with a sudden wave of angry coughs. He felt something tickle at the back of his throat, and was certain for half a second that he was going to throw up. His urine trickled to the floor as he hit his knees, and when the thing splashed into the toilet, Charles felt something cold squirm in his guts. The cookie floated in the filthy water like a strange buoy in an alien sea. As he watched it bob there, Charles made a decision that would change the rest of his short life. He slid his shoes on and left the house for the first time in months. The bell rang as he walked into Damien's, and the staff's smiling faces curdled as they saw him. Charles sat at the table he had taken every time he had eaten here. The staff went about their jobs, actively avoiding him, but Charles wasn't going anywhere. He knew that Damien had answers. He knew something, and he'd sit here until he got what he was after. Even if it was Damien telling him how exquisitely screwed he was going to get some answers. Damien let him sit there for close to an hour, before finally coming out. "I told you there was nothing I could do. You've been cursed. Don't you understand that? The least you could do is not spread it around." "You know something about this, though," Charles said, glaring at him from between his steepled fingers, "and I'm not leaving until I get some answers." Damien turned his head away, seeming to think about it before finally telling Charles to wait. "Without you calling in an order at 10, I can finally close this place up on time. Wait till then, order whatever you want, and I'll take you to someone who has answers." Charles scoffed. "I can't just sit here all day." Damien only shrugged. "If you want answers, then I guess you'll have to." With little choice but to wait, Charles ordered some lunch. The staff kept his drink full, and Damien was true to his word. Charles ate when he was hungry, drank when he was thirsty, and used their facilities sparingly. He couldn't help but imagine his poor apartment as it filled up with the buttery little cookies, and the longer he sat, the more anxious he became. Where was Damien taking him later? Who would explain the situation? Someone else who had called the number? As the sun set behind him, Charles wanted to go with him less and less, but knew that he needed to more and more. As the crowds faded and the restaurant emptied, Damien finally came out and told him it was time to go. "We can take my car," he said, indicating a small hatchback out front. The car ride was short. They drove a few streets towards a small cluster of family homes that ended in a cul-de-sac. Charles could see several people wave at Damien as he drove towards the house at the end of the turnabout, and the sight of that place made him a little wary. Where the others had well-maintained lawns and houses that looked well-kept, this house they stopped in front of looked old and ready to fall down. The grass was mostly sand, patchy and limp, and the front porch was covered in boxes that looked ready to be shipped. The place looked abandoned, like a hoarder's house, but Charles could see people coming and going through the front door, most of them carrying boxes like the one on the porch. Damien killed the engine and looked at Charles. "You sure you want to know? It won't change your fate." Charles nodded, unable to damn himself with his words, and Damien climbed out and set off towards the house. Charles followed meekly enough after, but it wasn't until he got to the porch that he realized what those boxes were. He didn't need to read the foreign characters to know what was inside. The open box contained a bunch of familiar yellow cookies that Charles had come to hate. Whoever owned this house was packaging the fortune cookies in boxes. When Damien opened the door, a cascade of wrapped fortune cookies slithered onto the porch. "It's even worse than usual," Damien mumbled, wading into the sea of cookies as he beckoned Charles forward. The inside was even worse. The house was full of boxes, and the pair had to wade through the hip-deep sea of fortune cookies. Charles could see others wading through them, shoving them into boxes as they took them out. Charles could see a kitchen and a den as they waded through the house, and Damien seemed to be leading him towards the back. As they made their way down a hallway towards the back bedroom, the cookies got thicker and thicker. Damien knocked on the door, calling out a name Charles didn't understand. "Uncle?" Damien asked, a strange gurgling coming from inside. "Uncle, I got a guest who wants to meet you. May we come in?" There was another gurgling response, and Damien invited Charles inside. Charles was surprised to find not a room full of cookies, but a neat and tidy bedroom. Inside was an elderly man in striped pajamas, his dark hair plastered against his skull, and his unreadable eyes floating dully in his wrinkled face. His sallow skin clung to his bones like a bleached corpse. and if he hadn't turned to acknowledge Damien, Charles would have thought he was dead. "Good to see you again, Uncle," Damien greeted him. "This is my uncle, Dallin. He once owned the restaurant that I own now, but he made a miscalculation. He was trying to cut costs, and when he saw that he could get more cookies by calling the number, he gave it a try. At first it was wonderful. Dallin had enough cookies to stock the store for months, and he was glad for the windfall. Soon, the cookies started taking over his house, though. They covered the floors, they crept up to the ceiling, they spilled into the yard, and finally they started filling him, too." The words sent a chill through Charles, but he had to be sure of what he was hearing. "When you say they filled him, what do you—" Dallin coughed suddenly, deeply, a racking cough that shook his whole body. Charles took a step towards the sick man, but Damien put a hand out to stop him. The old man crossed his arms over his chest, trying to steady himself, and bent low over the comforter. As the coughs became thick, Charles thought the old man meant to bring something up. Then he lunged forward suddenly. Charles watched as a cascade of cellophane-wrapped cookies fell onto the bedspread. He began to tremble, just like the one he had brought up earlier that day. "So," Charles said, having to swallow a mouthful of spit, not having the moisture to speak more than a few words, "so I'll start doing that too?" Damien nodded, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I'll have some of my people come over to pick up the cookies they leave behind. We can pay you for them, hopefully making it a little easier for you. Eventually we can bring you here. You can live in comfort for however long you have left, but eventually you'll be no different than my uncle here." Charles stood for a minute, unable to come to terms with what he was seeing. He wanted to deny what Damien had said. He wanted to tell him how it just couldn't be real. But then his body was consumed with vicious coughs, as if to prove how real it was. A single cookie pattered to the floor at his feet, and Charles realized it was already too late.